And you have to give a counter narrative to the one the establishment is giving. If you don't have a counter narrative, you're proving you're not able to build up a counter force to their actual power that prevents us from having a $15 minimum wage and Medicare for all and things like that. Um, and this whole thing about the neoliberal austerity politics, this synthetic left, as you mentioned with cancel culture, perfectly supplements this logic that somehow as human beings there's too much of us in the world. We're being in the world all a bit too much, and we have to kind of limit ourselves with political correctness, and we have to feel guilty about the fact that we like hamburgers, and we have to eat it's all this kind of it's kind of the same pathology, and it's a fundamental, deep-rooted Malthusianism, I think,
Yeah.
that the synthetic left is especially is reinforcing. But I mean, at the level of government, it's self-evident that the neoliberal establishments and ideologists for decades and decades, despite all the failures that you're talking about, they were able to ignore that just because of how ideologically potent this idea that we need to feel guilty about our humanity. We have to where there's too much of us in the world. We have to cut back. We have to always feel guilty. We can't have a sense of the realization of our latent potentials and power and the unleashing of the forces of production, so to speak. Um, I think this corresponds, if I were to sum it up, to some type of objective decline of liberalism. And to me, this decline of liberalism has led it to some kind of state of self contradiction and psychosis.
Sure. I mean, there's a lot that I can react to. I mean, as far as like the mindset here in the West, my whole life I've heard people say, "This is the greatest country in the world. This is the greatest country in the world. This America is the greatest country in the world." And if you so much as ask people, how did you come to this conclusion? Are you saying we have the most money? And they look at you like, "You must be brainwashed. You don't think America is the greatest country in the world? You must be brainwashed." I mean, we can't find our country on a map. I mean, the education is so low here. And we're told that all around the world, these people that are in anti-imperialist countries, they're all just brainwashed. They've all just been brainwashed. But it's like they can find their country on a map. They understand the views that Americans have, and they also understand the views of their own government, and they can compare them. Whereas here in the United States, people have no idea about the opposing viewpoints around the world. So, I mean, this brainwash hysteria in the United States is quite ridiculous. I mean, it's a huge amount of projection. That's what I would say about that. And that, yeah, I mean, and when you talk about the need to not be, just kind of, overly ideological. Look, there's plenty that we need to learn. I think the Cultural Revolution in China was a disaster. I think Deng Xiaoping's economic reforms were absolutely necessary. I think that there are non-Marxist Leninist forms of socialism in the world, like Ba'athist Arab socialism, like Bolivarianism. And that, we don't need to get bogged down in like the really, really nitpicky ideological debates of the 20th century, right? Who was better, Enver Hoxha or Nikita? I mean, I don't get. I'm kind of done with that kind of stuff. But at the same time, we can learn the lessons, right? I mean, I tell people that I mean, if we want to make a better country, right? If some other country was making a good car, we would look into it, right? If some other country was making a more efficient way of developing energy, we would look into it. So why wouldn't we look into a better political and economic model? And that we should study all of it, but blindly follow none of it, and try to figure out a model that can work for this country and how we can get ourselves out of the crisis over here. And when you talk about Malthusianism, really what it gets down to is this, right? You got to imagine a game, right? A game of King of the Mountain, where every kid's trying to get to the top of the hill. So one kid gets to the top of the hill and he announces, "Oh, game over! I'm at the top of the hill." That's what Malthusianism is, right? The Western imperialists, they control the oil markets. That's their main way of dominating things, is with the oil markets, right? We have an oil-based economic order. So they're at the top of the hill, and they've announced, "Oh, our fuel source, oil, that we happen to control, is polluting the world. So you know what? Human development has to end here. while we're at the top of the mountain. We'll stay at the top of the mountain, and we'll stay on oil. We're going to keep an oil-based economy, but everyone needs to stop developing because we're at the top of the hill. And that's what's basically been announced. That's the Malthusian viewpoint, right? That there's just, human history must stop because we're ahead, right? We quit while you're ahead. Well, we're ahead. We're at the top. We're winning the game. So human history, game over, right? And what's particularly eerie about that is that it's just kind of a basic need of human beings to survive. Is human beings want to grow, right? Human beings want to expand. They want to have more than they had before. They want to work hard for something. They want to have a family. They want to have children. But when you introduce the Malthusian pessimism into the conversation and you say, well, we all have too much and we all need to be poorer, you're basically, with those words, you're basically trying to kill people. I mean, that's what depression is, the mental illness of depression, right? When people cannot go forward, they lose their will, their drive to go out and do things in the world. Their body just kind of shuts down. That is depression. That is what drives people to become suicidal. And so when they announce, every day, it's coming out of your cell phone, every day, out of your cell phone, out of your computer, the Malthusian, there is no future. There's too many people in the world. Human beings are a cancer. This stuff is actively killing people. It is toxic. It is poisonous. And look, the nature of humanity, human beings are tool makers. We're creative creatures. We have the ability to march forward and to advance. And because they're at the top, they've announced that we can't advance anymore. Look, climate change is a reality. I don't deny climate change. The answer to climate change is obviously getting off of fossil fuels. We need a higher fuel source. We need fusion energy. I mean, when Vladimir Putin called for international cooperation, China, Russia, and the United States to come together to get fusion energy like yesterday, that is what needs to be said. We need fusion energy. We need to get off of the trap of the oil markets and natural gas and all of that. We need to get into a higher mode of technology. Plus, we need to start, expanding into outer space. Look, China's already getting helium-3 from the moon. We need to figure out how to extract resources from Mars. We need to figure out how to not limit humanity to just this planet, right? I mean, we need to start exploring stuff. Before John F. Kennedy was killed, Kennedy was bad in a lot of ways, but before he was killed, a lot of people don't know this. He called for there to be a joint moon mission between the USA and the Soviet Union. Can you imagine that, right? And he wanted the Soviet Union and the United States to team up to go to the moon. Not a space race, but a space cooperation. Imagine if something like that could be arranged today. That's the kind of thinking we need, right? We need progressive thinking, not this game over economic pessimism, there is no future stuff. And, it's one thing in the first world to say, oh, we've got too much. I don't agree with that. I don't think we have too much. I think a lot of working families around here are suffering. But to go to people in Africa with a much lower life expectancy, who've never had running water and never had electricity, and say, oh, you need to stay poor because of Mother Earth. That is the height of, you want to talk about white privilege and arrogance. And I mean, it is pretty unbelievable. You can't hold back economic development. You can't. Human beings want more than they already have. They want to advance. And we're not in this to make people poor. I don't know where people got this notion. The memo was sent out. Communists want everyone to be poor because capitalism is people having a lot of stuff, and communists are against that, and they want to make everyone poor. That is not true at all, right? The goal of socialism is to build a world with so much prosperity and abundance that we don't need a government, right? That we can eventually get to a level of material abundance where all inequality can be broken down. The need for the state can go away. People can just kind of do what they need and take what they need and do what they want to do. And, from each according to his own ability, to each according to his needs. That is the ultimate vision of Marxism, right? It is the height of progressivism, human progress, and the drive of human beings. What got us from, being hunter-gatherers living in caves to making iPhones and space travel, that is behind Marxism-Leninism. This is not a reactionary ideology. It's not a pessimistic ideology. It is about the human spirit and how human beings can conquer any challenge facing them. It believes that human beings can march forward and move ahead. That has always been what Marxism is about. What these people are pushing, this destructive, pessimistic, cancel culture stuff, this is not Marxism, I'll tell you that much. Now, in my book on Kamala Harris, I talked about the roots of it, right? And that, in a feudal society, right, people are very controlled. And the bourgeoisie, in order to bring down feudalism, they gave people permission to unleash their impulses toward anger, their impulses toward sexual release, right? And that the French Revolution was an explosion of sex and rage. right? The peasantry that had been very controlled were given permission to just, chop off people's heads and celebrate, but also permission to unleash their sexual desires. The Marquis de Sade was a big figure in the French Revolution. And that the bourgeoisie, in order to take power, they unleashed people's impulses, right? And Marxism came out of the aftermath of the bourgeois revolutions, the disappointment, right? That the bourgeois revolutions didn't create a just society, right? And so Marxism kind of held with it that belief that in order to bring down the old social order, we need to unleash impulses, unleash people's rage, etc. And that kind of the psychology of the bourgeois revolution kind of carried over. But right now, the capitalists, they're doing that, right? They're giving people permission to unleash their rage. They're giving people permission to unleash all their impulses and be as angry as they want and be destructive and all of that. Meanwhile, if you look at the strength of China, you look at the strength of countries around the world that are building socialism, it's not their ability to tell people to unleash their impulses that holds them together. It is the opposite. It's they give people a sense of community, a sense of purpose, a sense of joint effort, and almost that feeling that Sigmund Freud condemned, that feeling of religiousness and oneness with the universe, right? And if you look at what Stalin did during his 5-year plans, you look at what was achieved, in many countries, what Gaddafi did when he built the great man-made river, the biggest irrigation system in the world, right? It's about giving people a sense of community, giving people something to be part of, not just giving them permission to unleash their rage and their destructive impulses. I got into all of that in my book on Kamala Harris because it needs to be said. I talk about that in my City Builders and Vandals in Our Age, that we need to kind of rethink the psychology of what is it we're appealing to with Marxism. Are we just giving people permission to go out and break shit? Or are we telling people that the capitalists have broken the world and we're going to start rebuilding it?